In order to understand Syria, let me clarify 4 words which are essential in order to understand almost all the Middle Eastern situation right now. Okay? 1, the biggest division in the Middle East is the Sunni Shiite division. Way more violent, way more emotional, on a larger scale than the Israeli-Palestinian or any of those small situations we have over here. When you compare the casualties, the scale is unparalleled at all. Quickly, Sunni Shia, what is it? In 60 seconds. When Muhammad dies, he doesn't have a son, and he doesn't define who will replace him. I'm talking now about 7th century, okay? And therefore there's 2 mindsets. Some people say the replacer of Muhammad has to be someone who follows the ways of Muhammad. That is called Sunnat al-Nabi, the Sunni people. Other people say, no, he needs to be someone from the family of Muhammad. That's called the Shiites. Who could it be from the family of Muhammad? Well, his daughter Fatima, who married the cousin Ali, had a son called Hussein, who is a grandson of Muhammad, who can start a dynasty of men who are the descendants of Muhammad. Those are the Shiites. And the people that follow the ways of Muhammad are the Sunnis. The only problem is that same Hussein was assassinated by the Sunnis, and a division was created. I describe to you right now a political division about who should be the future leader of the Muslim world, a political spiritual leader. But what happened very fast throughout the years, theological differences were created. And what happened was that the Sunnis and the Shiites are actually 2 different religions under Islam, which do not get along. You have now, think about it, Sunnah and Shia. There are 4 squares in a big square. Sunnah, Shia. Below over here there's a word called political Islam. People tend to look at the Middle East with the term radical Islam. You cannot use radical Islam because radical is a relative word. What's radical? If I chop your head, she will say, he's radical. But then she will chop 7 heads. I suddenly became the moderate in 1 second. You're the radical. So who defines who radical is in the Middle East, right? So the radical is irrelevant because it's all depending. So what political Islam is wonderful. It's a beautiful religion like other religions as well. Political Islam are bodies or nations or states that believe that there should not be a separation between religion and state, and that either the constitution or the law should be the laws of the Quran and the Sharia. An example for political Islam, Iran is political Islam, right? Al-Qaeda political Islam, ISIS political Islam, Hamas political Islam. The other square is problematic. I would call it...
Don't they all study the Quran?
What? They all study the Quran, but the question is, do you want to be just a Muslim? Or do you believe that the civil laws of the nation should be the Quran itself? Meaning, do you want to be a Muslim, or do you want to live in a place where, for example, not praying is a crime? So I'm saying political Islam, when you actually put together religion and state in a way, or region, because not everything here is functioning within states. Right? So Egypt, for example, is not political Islam right now. You can be a Muslim. There are Islamic laws, but yet you are not obligated by law to pray or to eat halal. Right? The other square is a bit problematic because it's very relative, but I didn't find a different word for it, but it's either modernity or secularism. Right? Which means I want to be a Muslim, but I don't want it to be an obligation by law. Almost all the conflicts in the Middle East are either between the squares or within the squares, which means Saudi Arabia against Iran, Sunni political Islam against Shia political Islam, right? Sometimes you see Al-Qaeda against ISIS. That's when you have 2 Sunni political Islams. If they're in the same square, it tells you that they're fighting over dominancy of that square, right? So now you could have political Islam against secularism, or you can have political Islam against political Islam if it's Sunni against Shia, or battles within the square. But those are the important words in order to understand what's happening over here. Syria. Syria is a country which used to be a country until 2011 actually, with 17 million people until 2011, right? Which was formed between 43 and 46. Eventually it was before that controlled by the French. They pull out and Syria is created, right? Eventually there is a revolution in the 1970s where a party called the Ba'ath Party takes over. There is in Syria another group called Alawi. The Alawi are a stream of Shia. Therefore, we could simplify it in a non-accurate way and call them also Shiites. In fact, they were non-Shiites until 1975, and the Shiites re-included them as a branch of Shiites in the 70s of the 20th century. They're 11% of Syria. The Sunnis are 83% of Syria. Now you put it together, you say, well, why is there no 100%? That's fine, because you've got Druze and Palestinians and Kurds and a few other people over there, which are not counted right now for this conversation. Normally you would say the 83% Sunnis are supposed to control the 11% Alawi, wake up in the morning and say, we've got a minority, what do we do with them? That's how usually it works. But what happened was, because of the mindset which was called Pan-Arab, in the 70s, a party which said religion is not important, it's a matter of you are an Arab or not, right? Took power, and the Alawic families became dominant in that concept and actually took the leadership, cancelled elections forever, and you found yourself from 1970 to 2011 that the 11% Alawi are controlling the 83% Sunnis. And everyone was saying, well, that doesn't make sense, it's a matter of time until it will switch. In 2011, we have what we call the Arab Spring. Tunisia, Egypt. Generally, the idea is that people wanted transparency and freedom and equality and, better regimes, because most of those countries, if not all of them, were ran by very corrupted and violent regimes. So we in the West, we always say, oh, Facebook. Well, maybe Facebook or social media brought people to the street. Facebook is a wonderful tool. It can get people to the street, but once they're on the street, it doesn't know how to manage them. Right? That's the problem with social media. Now the question is, who's the best person to manage the situation on the ground? Egypt, it started with the Islamic Brotherhood. Here, there was no candidate. So what happened was, people came to the street, and the Sunnis were demanding the Alawis to step down. And if you check all the analysts, Middle East analysts, intelligence analysts and so on, everyone was anticipating that the Alawic, led by Assad, the leader, are about to fall. People were giving them 2 weeks, 5 weeks, 2 months. But they did not fall. And they did not fall because Assad just did not give up. He knew, or he believed, that if he steps down, no matter what happens to him personally, right, the Alawic people will be slaughtered as a revenge by the Sunnis for all those years of control. And there's even an historical memory that in 1981 there were Sunnis that tried to revolt somewhere in Syria, a place called El-Hamma, and Assad, the father of the current leader, killed 20,000 of them. So you can assume that there will be some revenge down the road. So he's standing up and fighting, not giving up. Well, the Free Syrian Army, which is secular, modern, political Sunni Islam, is confronting Assad, which is, by the way, modern Shia. Look at him, he's wearing a suit, right? But the fact that there was not going in any direction, and no big power actually interfered with the concept that, it will end anyway. Because when you're a superpower, whether it's America that went in Afghanistan or Iraq, it did not seem like that went exactly the way they thought it will. So why enter this war? Well, it doesn't make any sense because there's no oil, so there's no urgency. And secondly, it doesn't make sense. The 83% will take over the 11%, but that's the natural estimation. But then what happened? That going back and forth created a vacuum. And the vacuum is filled up with rebels. So now you have a lot of organizations that are starting to pop up. You need to understand how the Middle East is functioning is that Middle East, everywhere, is militias and villagers and tribes. When you say that Assad is in control, it means that for years he controlled the militias. When you say Hamas is in control in Gaza, it means that they control the multiple militias of the families. And they will obey them. But then there's no one in control. You just need to remove control. The militias are there. Every village, every tribe, everyone has a militia, right? So you're starting to see a chaotic way where everyone has their own interest. Now, while you have a lot of militia, call them terror organizations, militias and so on, you had at the time a bigger brand. It was called Al-Qaeda. That was the prestige. And if you're a small militia who have a terror organization, you would rather be a part of Al-Qaeda than being independent. You've got a brand behind you, you've got a back behind you. The only thing you need to do is call them, tell them that you're now Al-Qaeda, and you'll get sponsored. Which means that if I am the militia of this building, and I call Al-Qaeda and say, listen, what do you want me to do to be Al-Qaeda? They said, you 1, 2, 3, 4. Al-Qaeda arrived, no one moved. It's just a decision of a leader on the ground. So now Al-Qaeda was operating. Now we're talking about also for years post the second Iraqi war in Iraq with the Americans, and you saw a lot of militias also over there. And Al-Qaeda really had two more massive organizations. Al-Qaeda Syria was called Jabhat al-Nusra. Al-Qaeda Iraq was an organization that developed and eventually was called Dawlat al-Islamiyya al-Iraq wa Sham, which you are translating as Islamic State of Iraq and Asham. Asham in Arabic is the Levant, the north. I'm not blaming you, but the West. Call it ISIS, Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. Sorry, Asham is not Syria. Asham is the north. Syria is in the north. But it matters. Now why does it matter? Because the term Asham in Arabic includes Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Israel, and Jordan. Now in America it doesn't matter if it's Syria or Asham, but for me it matters. I live in Asham, I don't live in Syria. So ISIS, it doesn't include what it really should include, while Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, that's what it is, includes more. So Barack Obama did correct himself and say not ISIS but ISIL, and that was the brand, and therefore you should call it ISIL and not ISIS. In Arabic they're all called Daesh. The years went by and eventually that same organization said we don't want to operate only in Asham, we want to operate in Libya and in Egypt, which is not Asham. So how do you do that? You shrink your name again to IS, Islamic State, or in Arabic, Dawlat al-Islamiyya. And now you can operate in Africa. So in fact, you should call it the Islamic State. But we're still calling it ISIS because a good brand sticks, right? So I'll use the word ISIS even though it's wrong. Anyhow, what was happening is that you had Jabhat al-Nusra operating in Syria and ISIS operating in Iraq. One day, 2013, ISIS crossed into Syria. Jabhat al-Nusra said, what are you doing on my land? You know, you're supposed to be in Iraq. They called the headquarters of Al-Qaeda, whoever that is, and say, hey, could you please tell al-Bakhri to move back to Iraq? So Al-Qaeda, which had a problem with that organization anyway, because they were believing that they're killing too many Muslims, tells them, you go back to Iraq, you should not go to Syria. Otherwise, you will not be part of Al-Qaeda. So ISIS says, well, in this case, we are going independent. And they were well managed, and ISIS became a parallel organization to Al-Qaeda. Very good management, right? Good PR, and started to compete with Al-Qaeda on dominancy over the square of Sunni political Islam. They come in over here. So now what do we have in Syria? We have the original Free Syrian Army, which are those modern Sunnis that want freedom. They are confronting Al-Qaeda, which believe that it needs to be a political Islamic future Syria. ISIS is also fighting the Free Syrian Army, which believe also that they need to be a political Islamic Sunni state. And Al-Qaeda and ISIS are also fighting one another. Which means on one side you've got the Free Syrian Army with Al-Qaeda and with ISIS against Assad. While that is happening, ISIS and Al-Qaeda are fighting the Free Syrian Army. And while that is happening, Al-Qaeda and ISIS are fighting themselves. That's one side. Well, Assad looked at all of that and said, well, how do I deal with all of that? That's a bit too much on a one-on-one debate. And he received, first of all, support from Iran. Iran has an organization called Hezbollah, the Party of God. It's a Lebanese Shiite organization formed in the 80s in Lebanon. And Iran has a big interest over here in Syria. And ISIS themselves, all through this organization, start operating with the Alawites to prevent any Sunni control, whether it's political Islam or none. None of them is good for Iran, right? So you had Hezbollah in Iran with Assad confronting the Sunni side, and that is pretty much the civil war. So what's happening right now is that south from those hills over there, there's an organization called Shuhada al-Yarmouk, which is a fragment or branch of ISIS. From that area to the line over here, you had until July Jabhat al-Nusra. Jabhat al-Nusra was getting weakened, and they realized that there is a trend in the world that everyone is against ISIS, but they cannot get any support because of Al-Qaeda. So they changed the name into Jabhat Fatah Hasham. They're not Jabhat al-Nusra anymore. It's irrelevant. They told Al-Qaeda, listen, we are the same ideology, same people, nothing changed, but we are not Al-Qaeda anymore. And now they can get funded by people that will not fund Al-Qaeda. They're operating over here, easy to cooperate, whether it's with Americans or even with Israel perhaps, even though it's not something formal over here. And then you've got to the north, the area which is Hezbollah, Iran, and Assad himself. If we would have had a peace agreement today with Syria, Assad cannot come to the border to receive the piece of paper. He doesn't control our border. He controls a very small part of our very northern border, but most of it is not under the Syrian control anymore by those rebels. That's pretty much what's happening over there. What's fascinating is that I just gave you a presentation of about 20 minutes and I didn't say a word. Israel. What do we have to do with that? Or what people ask me, what's good for us? The truth is nothing's good for us. Because what they have all in common, the Iranian political Islam, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, even if it's none of their immediate interest, all of them will have in their charters a non-existence of the State of Israel. We don't need to get too scared because most of them will have in their charter also the non-existence of Jordan, of Egypt, of Saudi Arabia as modern states. So we actually have in common with other countries at the same time. But there's two mindsets over here. On one hand, it is always popular to say that you would rather have a state player than a non-state player. Therefore, Assad regaining Syria would be easier for us because when you have a state player, if you are attacked, you have something to attack. A non-state player, there's nothing to pay back. So that's, on that hand, Assad would be better. On the other hand, today, Israel does not see ISIS or Al-Qaeda or any organization as an existential threat. The only existential threat that Israel sees is Iran, right? And therefore Assad is Iran. So we definitely don't want to strengthen Assad and the Iranian control of the area. So that's not good for us. I know I'm contradicting one another because I don't have a clear answer for you. The other situation is that people will say that the situation shifted because for us Israelis, and remember we're selfish, we care about our own safety and our own future. Until recently, Israel was afraid of a potential Syrian-Egyptian invasion, which could be an existential threat for us, but you in America, it's no threat for you whatsoever. What happened today is that those players, whether it's called ISIS or Al-Qaeda, and if you'll kill ISIS within a year, like some people are saying, something else will come up probably with a different name, right? They are not an existential threat for us, but they're a threat for all of you. And in this sense, it's also, well, that's better, that's easier for us to manage when we are part of other alliances against something right over there. So at the end of the day, it's not a clear cut what is good and what is bad. It's all very challenging, and Israel stays out of it for now.
You have time on it, so
Huh?
time is
I don't know if there is any benefit. It's very difficult to say that because there's 500,000 people that died over there, and even though there's a limit to how much political interest can allow you to sit quietly when you have 500,000 people dying across your border. Time is bad for humanity, right? Maybe politically for Israel, nothing's good for Israel right now, but for humanity, and we're part of humanity, that's bad. So that needs to end. But what can come out, I don't have a clear answer.
Hezbollah, you said again, is
Iranian Lebanese. Let me just show you something
and they're
interesting.
aligned with Assad.
With Assad, yes. Let me just show you something interesting. Think about the Syrian army once again. If there's a Sunni Shiite, big battle. You need to know, by the way, when you want to understand the Middle East, who's Sunni and who's Shiite, right? So Iran is Shiite. Iraq used to be controlled by Sunni while it was Saddam Hussein, but the majority of people on the Iraqi ground, traditional Iraq, is Shiite. Former democracy, you've got a Shiite place over there. Shiite will always be loyal to Shia, not to a state, especially if they don't see it as a colonial state of some sort. And therefore, Iran is Shiite. Iraq, by the way, you know that Iran is not really that big. Iran is this big because all of that is a salty desert which even a chopper can't land. So you always need to look, and Iraq is, along the rivers. So that is Shiite. Iraq has majority of Shiites. Let's leave Syria as a question mark. Lebanon. Lebanon is the biggest mess out of it all. Because the biggest minority group in Lebanon are the Shiite, but they have 40%. So if you would count Muslims as a group, they would have over 60%. But they don't see themselves as a homogeneous group. They differentiate Sunnis and Shiites. So no one has 55%, therefore no one can control and have any legitimacy in Lebanon. That's why it's very difficult to function as a state in Lebanon. But the biggest militia, if there would be tomorrow a war between the Iranian Hezbollah militia in Lebanon and the Lebanese army, within hours probably Hezbollah would take over. So the strongest power in Lebanon are the Shiites also. So now take a look. Shia, Shia, Shia. Turkey is Sunni, Jordan is Sunni, Saudi Arabia is Sunni, Egypt is Sunni. If Syria becomes Sunni, Sunni takes the length. If Syria is controlled by Shiites, the Iranians take the width.